Today is June 25th, 2015. I'm at Ball State University in the studios of WIPB with Jerry Waite as part of the Ford Oval of Honor project. Jerry, can you state your name and spell your name for us?
Well, my nickname is Jerry. My official name is, my Ball State name is Gerald, Gerald Waite.
Okay.
And, but I go by Jerry. As you know, I sign everything that way.
Okay. We'll go by Jerry.
Okay.
That'll be
That's
easier. Can you tell us where you were born and when?
I was born in Carbondale, Illinois in 1947, raised in Albion, Illinois, which is near Princeton, Indiana, in a very small farming town. Raised in town, but did farm work most of my life, or most of my young life. Worked on farms, and went to school in Trinidad, Colorado for my first year, and then came back to the University of Illinois.
How would you describe your family's history with regards to the military? Did you have a history of service in your family?
My last 8 grandfathers were in the military. My first grandfather that I know of was a man by the name of Benjamin Waite, who was a Puritan in Deerfield, Massachusetts. And he was Sergeant Benjamin Waite in the local militia. He was known as a proficient Indian killer, and the Indians killed him in 1703 in a raid on Deerfield and skinned him alive because of his reputation. But I've had grandfathers in that war, grandfathers in the War of 1812, grandfathers in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War. I had my great-grandfather's Civil War surgeon's kit from the Civil War. I donated that to the Illinois State Museum since he was in the 1st Illinois Cavalry. My grandfather, my mom's dad, died when she wasn't even born yet from the result of mustard gas in the Argonne. And so my dad was in the Army Air Corps during World War II. Although he was a trainer in Biloxi, he never went overseas. So
your family history is rich, or well populated, with men who served their country. Was it any surprise to your parents that you entered the service, and how did you enter the service?
Well, actually, I was at the University of Illinois and my grades were abysmal. My draft board in Albion, Illinois told my dad that I was number 3 on their hit list for draft. So I quit school and enlisted, quote unquote, to do what I thought I might be able to direct what I wanted to do. And I signed up as an artillery surveyor, did basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, did advanced individual training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, was a qualified artillery surveyor. Officer candidate school for artillery was right across the street from my barracks at Fort Sill, and I liked that. I looked at that, liked that, thought, I really want to go over there. So I applied, and I had 90 semester hours in college, so I was given serious consideration. I got my orders for OCS, and it said Fort Benning, Georgia. And I asked my company commander, I said, so is there artillery OCS at Fort Benning? He just laughed. And
so Benning is infantry.
Fort Benning is infantry, all infantry. It's the infantry school, and still is. But I flew to Fort Benning on the night of August 4th, 1968. We got off the plane. We were greeted about 5 o'clock in the morning at a barracks, told to leave our duffel bags where we were in formation, and we ran 5 miles. 2 people who didn't finish the run we never saw again. Their bags were taken somewhere, they were taken somewhere, but we never ever saw them again. But for 29 weeks, we ran and ran and ran and ran. And I went from there to jump school, parachute school, which was just across the street. Got assigned to the 82nd Airborne in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And at Fort Bragg, I was late getting there. I didn't go with my cohort because I'd broken an ankle in jump school and I was a casual at Fort Benning, which meant I was staff duty officer in every other dirty detail they could find for a second lieutenant. And so I was late, and I got assigned to the Division G5, which is Civil Affairs. And I did basic civil affairs stuff. I did a study of education in Puerto Rico when the 82nd was in Puerto Rico for a couple of weeks. I did local stuff around North Carolina. I was at Fayetteville, North Carolina, did local stuff with civilian populations. And they sent me to Civil Affairs School at Fort Gordon, Georgia. So I went there, and from there I went to Vietnam. I arrived in Vietnam on January the 1st of 1970.
Was it a disappointment to you at all to be trained first in artillery, then in infantry, and now you're going over as a civil affairs officer? What was your...
I really, actually I liked civil affairs. I had 90 hours in college, most of that in anthropology. I kind of imagined myself the social scientist, although I really wasn't at the time. But how to combine the Army and the military with what I really liked. So civil affairs was really good. I just didn't know how it was going to work in Vietnam.
What was, going back to officers candidate school training, you talked about running and running and running, so physically challenging. What were the mental or personal challenges?
Okay, in officer candidate school, as I said, we ran a lot, but we were always deprived of sleep. We averaged 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. We had to learn how to sleep on the trucks when we were going to ranges. We slept sitting in classes. One guy even claimed he learned how to sleep with his eyes closed. Food was really stringent. You had to do 25 push-ups and 10 pull-ups on the pull-up bar to get into the mess hall. Then you had 5 minutes to eat sitting at attention, so with one hand in your lap, and you could eat with the other hand, and you could look straight ahead, not ever look around or talk to anybody. And if you did, they'd run you out. They'd just dump your food and run you out. We had one guy that lost a lot of weight in the first 6 or 8 weeks. He left. He was actually a staff sergeant in the Army who had applied for OCS, but he just didn't adapt. And adapting was the real problem, figuring out how to cheat without being dishonest, how to sleep without, there was a real stringent honor code. If you lied, you were out. If you stole anything or broke the rules, you were out. But we'd have our wives come bring us pizza and slip it through the windows at night so we could get stuff to eat. And we would take care of people who, for instance, if they, one of the ways of harassing people is to put one person down for push-ups while everybody else is running. And that person then has to do 25 push-ups and catch up. And so what we would do after a while, we learned that if they put somebody down for push-ups, we'd all stop. We'd block traffic. And this is a formation, we're a platoon of 40 people. There may be 160 more behind us. So if we do that, we break up the whole formation. We stop post-traffic, which is cars coming and going on the roads. And we basically can, have a little power to harass back. And when somebody screams at us, candidate such and such, candidate wait, I didn't tell you to get down. Oh, I thought you did, sir. And But we learned how to work together, how to cooperate, how to basically give back what we got, and how to survive, how to adapt and survive. 139 graduated out of that initial class of 240. And out of that, there's an awful lot of them dead, but dead in Vietnam, didn't survive. My officer candidate roommate, Bobby Williams, he died on September the 29th, 1970 in, I can't remember which valley. It was a Highland battle. He was in the 4th Infantry Division, and he took a round through the head. He's buried in the black section of the cemetery at Lawton, Oklahoma, and I've been there to visit the grave. I always send flowers on behalf of all of us in the company. But I really dislike the fact that that there's a black section and white section of that cemetery, and there's no veterans marker on his grave either. I guess his family didn't want it. I've never been able to locate the family. But we were tough. We could run 10 miles in combat boots with a pack. We could, each of us, do 500 push-ups. Everybody could do 500 push-ups. We had push-up competitions in the hallway at night. and that we had people that actually could do 100 one-handed, although I couldn't. But we were really in pretty good physical shape. We were sharp mentally, and we knew how to work as a team.
Did that essence of teamwork and survivability help you the most when you get to Vietnam and you find out you're not going to be with an Army unit, but you've been assigned to the Marines? What was that like? What was your reaction to that assignment?
My reaction to the Marine Corps, being assigned to the Marines, I didn't even know where I was going to be assigned when I got to Vietnam. So I flew into Cam Ranh Bay, arrived in the middle of the night, went to a barracks, looked like a plywood barracks in the United States. And the next morning they said, well, you're going to Da Nang to the 29th Civil Affairs Company. And when I got there, they said, oh yeah, you're going to the Marines. We'll send you right up there. So they put me in a Jeep and sent me to 1st Marine Division. I survived well in the Marines. The Marines are all about a team. The Army in Vietnam, I think the Army was scattered. You had maintenance units, you had helicopter units, you had people who were in this sort of unit, that sort of unit. But the Marine Corps was for the most part strictly a fighting unit. And the esprit de corps, the teamwork, the feel of the place was something that I understood and liked and got along with. They'd call me a dirty Army doggy every now and again, but they accepted me.
I was wondering, you are not just Army, but you are a freshly minted out of OCS second lieutenant?
I was a second lieutenant when I got to Vietnam, but I was pretty promptly promoted to first lieutenant. But I was still very green, and the Marine Corps particularly understands that lieutenants of any rank are green. So, but they treated me all right. In the Marine Corps particularly, more than the Army, there's a real division between officer and enlisted. So you had your officers club, and officers would never go to the enlisted club. You had your officers mess and enlisted mess. The only officer that ate in the enlisted mess was the commanding general, and he'd eat in an enlisted mess every week somewhere. And God help the mess officer that the food wasn't up to par. But the Marine Division rear, they had outhouses that were officers only, and all that sort of stuff. So there was a real division, but within the officer corps at 1st Marine Division, I was really accepted, well accepted, and they really made me feel at home.
Describe your assignment with the 1st Marine Division and the team you worked with.
Okay, we had a small detachment of the 29th Civil Affairs Company, a captain, 2 lieutenants, and 3 enlisted men that did refugee work. We organized med camps for refugee villages. At that time, in 1970, we were in what they call the pacification era of the war in Vietnam. And we were trying to basically rectify some of the wrongs that had been done and some of the damage. So in Quang Nam province, it's about the size of the state of Maryland, and that was marine land. But Quang Nam province had 500,000 people as a population, and half of those were refugees when I got there. We did return to village projects, we did med caps, we organized med caps, medical professionals who would go to refugee villages and treat people for all sorts of things. I actually had one doctor one time that I took out to a refugee village with several nurses, 2 doctors, and we got there about 8:30 or 9, and by 9:30 this guy was sitting in my Jeep. And I asked him what he was doing, and he said, I've seen every disease they told me ever existed in medical school. I want to go back. I said, well, I can't take you back. You'll just have to sit. So I left him to sit out in the sun until I got the others ready to go, or till we'd treated everybody. It's not a big refugee camp. It's probably 400 or 500 people. So we had lines till about 3 or 4 o'clock, and then we had to leave.
Did this doctor refuse to work? Did he ever come back?
No, he refused to work. He sat in the Jeep all day, and never volunteered for one of those things again. I think he was really upset by what he saw. Refugee villages are terrible, terrible places. You know, we have 30 million people as refugees in the world today, and that really worries me because the refugee camps I've seen are just nasty, dirty, disease-ridden places. And it's just, you know, that's really, if you think about 30 million, that's a lot.
What positive effects did you see in those refugee camps during your time there?
I'm not sure there was any positive effect. We tried to make it bearable. But you've got to consider the military mission is to search out and destroy the enemy, period. That's basically it. So, and that really goes double for the Marine Corps. They have boots on the ground to locate, identify, and destroy the enemy. So basically, our job was to keep civilians out of their way. If civilians were in refugee camps, if they had food, if they had water, if they had some medical treatment, then they weren't out in harm's way with the Marines. The thing people don't understand with the military really aren't social workers. The military have a mission, and that mission concerns what they identify as an enemy. That's their assignment. So stuff like civil affairs is superfluous. It's over and above the military mission, but it's to keep the military mission from being hindered by civilians. And the other thing, the Quakers in Quang Nam province alone, the Quakers documented over 100 massacres of one sort or another, where civilians got in the middle of a firefight or civilians were killed. We had Korean Marines operating as well as American Marines, and the Korean Marines killed several groups of civilian people, which the Marines later got blamed for. But, and I talked one time to a Korean company commander, and he says, you pay us to kill VC, they're all VC, we kill them all. That was his answer.
So an interchange like that with a Korean Marine commander and also the American combat commanders, did your mission as far as civil affairs and trying to keep civilians out of harm's way ever conflict with their mission? And if so, how did you resolve that?
Um, there's a lot of conflict of mission. You know, at the time, maybe I viewed myself as too much of a social worker, and I got reminded of it often. But when I lived in villages and I worked in villages with what were called CAP Marines, Combined Action Platoon, it'd be 7 Marines that would live in a refugee village or a Return to Village project. I lived in a Return to Village project for 4 months with 7 Marines. And they would really get on my case that this is interfering with ambush tonight, or this is interfering with patrolling, or this is, you know, you can't build that out there, that's out of our security perimeter, that sort of thing. And I was a lieutenant and the commander of the CAP was a sergeant. So technically I outranked him, but for security issues, he was absolutely in charge. So he thought I was young, dumb lieutenant, but he would tell me, you know, it was always, sir, you can't do that. And that's how he would say it.
So there was the chain of command was respected, but at the same time, was he inflexible in his military orders?
You know, the chain of command is really difficult. You know, if you're a lieutenant, you really need to listen to people who are oftentimes subordinate to you, but they outrank you in terms of age, stage, knowledge, wartime experience, etc. So you know, you become much more flexible. We had a lot of lieutenants that were killed when they got there because they simply decided they were in charge. They knew how it was going to be. They would take orders and put people directly in harm's way without any consideration for the situation or whatever. They get orders to take a hill. They'd say, okay guys, take that hill. And maybe taking that hill needed thought out a little more. And oftentimes platoon sergeant would tell a platoon leader, lieutenant, you know, we can't do it like that, sir. We've got to do this a little differently. We've got our orders, but we've got to handle it better. And oftentimes orders were coming from people who were not in the field, people who didn't see the terrain, people who didn't see us on the ground. They didn't know what that hill looked like. They didn't know that there was a minefield in between us and the hill. They didn't know that, you know, what sort of casualties we were taking from snipers. They didn't know a lot of that sort of stuff.
Was there a dissatisfaction then with the troops who were on the ground in performing the missions and the higher command?
Not in the Marine Corps. I saw some Army units that I was close to where there was. The Army units seemed to have a lot of trouble. Marine Corps esprit de corps is much different than the Army. There were some race problems. We had race problems within the Marines. We had race problems in the Army. We had a lot of dissatisfaction. Actually, I had a guy that I recommended for court-martial in our 29th Civil Affairs unit. He was assigned to me with the Marines, but he really worked hard at keeping everything screwed up. And in the field, he couldn't be counted on. I never wanted to get shot at with him around because I didn't know whether it was him or somebody else. I didn't trust him, couldn't trust him.
How can you describe in any detail any of the race problems you had, and you as an officer, how did you deal with that or diffuse the situation?
Okay, I didn't have any direct contact with race problems in the field, mainly because I was with a 7-man team most of the time in the field that were all white. A friend of mine from 5th Marines was a black lieutenant, and he oftentimes had problems with, basically, he would tell me that blacks in his unit didn't want to go to the field, or they would ask him why he was Uncle Tom. They would basically, he said, that they weren't necessarily good Marines. They were drafted Marines. Marines could be drafted at that point in time, and you could, when you went to the draft, they would tell you, okay, you four are going to the Army, you two are going to the Marines. Just go down the line like that. And some of the black Marines were drafted, and the Marine Corps had to keep them. They couldn't get rid of them. Nowadays, they can, if they have somebody that's unsuitable, they can get rid of them, discharge them. But he said that his biggest problem was probably race within his unit, and that there was a lot of division between black and white. In the Army, you saw the same thing.
How much of a factor do you think the struggle for civil rights here in the United States was having an impact in the military?
A lot. There was a lot of impact from what was going on here in the States. People idolized Martin Luther King. People idolized Malcolm X. People, this was after the assassination of both men. People really were on it like, why are we fighting this white man's war here? And I heard that in person several times. But Martin Luther King's speech on the Vietnam War and some of the things that Malcolm X had to say really affected the way black soldiers felt in Vietnam about what they were doing there. And they'd be like, why am I risking my life for some war that's created by some white guy in Washington? That's how they put it.
Did you understand that at the time, and or do you understand it now, looking back?
At the time, I was sort of offended by it. I mean, I was really rigid, structured, lieutenant, thought I was really doing the right thing, and I didn't understand where they were coming from. I was really offended. The other thing was people of that stripe would, the times I was in the field, when I was in the field, I wouldn't want to be with people like that because, once again, you couldn't trust them. You have to trust you have to trust the guys you're with. You have to be able to trust that they're covering your back and you're covering theirs. So at this point in time, I understand clearly where they were coming from. And it was actually, considering the war itself, King and Malcolm X were both right. Although they were coming at it from a very different aspect. The war wasn't right. We were wrong in that war. And some people had the foresight and vision to say, hey, we shouldn't be participating in this.
Yeah. When you went out into the field, describe some of the activities that you did that were military and some of the activities you did that were civil affairs.
Well, when I was in the field, civil affairs was military. Everything I did was military, whether it was building a school, which I'm really remembered for there now. I'm really surprised. But I went back to that village and they said, oh, you were the lieutenant that built the school. But everything had a military purpose, whether it was settling people in one place or trying to get agriculture going again in a controlled environment where you could secure it. Everything was about security, everything was about strategy, everything was about keeping military control, or what we thought keeping military control. When I go back now, I look at it and we maybe controlled 5% of the land and about that same percentage of the people. We weren't really in charge. We just thought we were at the time.
And when you lived for 4 months in that village, you lived with them.
Yes.
You weren't coming in and going out. And what was it like to live with them? What were your relations like in that village with the locals?
When I lived at Gonoy, that's the village that I lived in. It was Phu Loc, Gonoy Island, an inland island. myself and the Marines, we got our food supplies from the outside. And then there was a small Army unit that was there with another Vietnamese unit, and they got supplies. But we ate with the locals. We slept in local bunkers. There was a bunker attached to every house. When we weren't on ambush or patrol, we slept in the village. We worked with people to try and get irrigation going again. We worked with people to try and clear fields. My first job when I lived there was destroying bombs. The place had been carpet bombed for 6 months prior to our moving into that village. And in the first month I was there, I destroyed 2,500 bombs. I would pay kids to find bombs for me, and then and oftentimes the bombs were booby-trapped, but the kids would show me where the tripwires were. And so we'd tiptoe up to a bomb and put plastic explosive on it and blow it up and put a 20-minute timer on a 20-minute fuse on it, pull it, and tiptoe away and go find a big hole to crawl in. But I had kids there that called bomb finders. I'm still acquainted with some of them today. I still know some of them. They're grandparents now. But I was paying them 25 or 50 cents for every bomb they found for me. And I figure at this point in time, they really didn't care if I got killed, but it would do in their source of income. So that's why there were a couple of times that where bombs were booby-trapped, they were really careful to tell me, don't step there, there, and there. You know, they showed me how to get to it. I had one bomb finder that was killed. There's a thing called a cluster bomb that we used a lot of in Vietnam. And cluster bombs have they have 730 baseball-sized bombs that come out of a larger bomb unit, and then they twirl and scatter over a large area the size of a football field. And about 30% didn't go off, so the kids would get them and play with them, and sometimes they didn't go off because they didn't spin enough in the air and arm. So throw somebody a curveball and it might explode when they catch it, which is what happened to one of my kids. But they were warned not to pick them up, not to touch them. And I really am scared of cluster bombs. I never touched one other than to very gently lay a little block of plastic explosive on it and set a timer and literally tiptoe away from it. They're so dangerous. And they're still blowing them up there today. They're still finding them. In Laos, they estimate there's as many as 20 million of them left. In Vietnam, in Quang Nam province alone, there may be 5 million of them still on the ground. I was there last summer and the Army was still blowing them up on Gonoi.
There's the human cost, the civilians who are kind of caught in the middle between the warring factions. But did you ever get the sense that some of those civilians may have actually been VC?
Trying to evaluate what civilians were doing and who civilians were in the war itself was really, really difficult. Sometimes I agreed with the Koreans. They're all VC. But I liked people. I got along with people in the villages. My peer, the guy I was assigned to was the village chief. He was assassinated, but they didn't assassinate me. They could have. Why
didn't they assassinate you? I guess is my follow-up question.
I don't know why they didn't shoot me. They could have. Maybe I wasn't worth it. Maybe they didn't want that much trouble. Maybe I brought stuff to the village that everybody wanted. I got a lot of supplies. And I brought stuff. I built a school, I got books, I got rice, I got irrigation tools, I got farm tools. And I think the village chief got assassinated for political reasons, not for pragmatic reasons. He didn't care what people got as long as he was in charge and he was getting his own. So it may have had to do with his own corruption. But I figured out later, the kids showed me, when I went in 2004, the kids showed me where the tunnels were beneath where I lived. And I thought, I don't know how I survived this. But my The village chief got whacked. There was a military, I can't think of the word, but the military guy I worked with, Captain Yim, he got shot, wounded, and it broke his leg up really badly, so he never came back to the field. A guy by the name of Joe Smith that I worked with, he was State Department civilian, and he got me the funds for school and the funds for agricultural stuff. But he got killed. In 2011, I took his wife back to where he got killed, and his wife actually met the person who probably was the commander in charge of that. So the figuring out who was the most difficult part of the war. Basically, in that war, 300,000 Vietnamese people that were military, 300,000 died. 3 million people died total. So 10% were military, the rest were civilians. And then as a result of the war, another couple million people have died since. So the cost of the war is $5.2 million, according to the Vietnamese. According to the American government, the war only killed 3 million people. Only, as they say. They say that, only.
And at any point while you were over there, did you experience a loss of faith in your mission?
Talking about, as I talk about and think about faith in my mission, I don't believe that I ever faltered. I always thought I was in the right. But I told you I was a rigid young lieutenant, 22-year-old lieutenant. And I thought I was doing the right thing. And so obstacles were obstacles. They're just something to be overcome. I did have a lot of freedom. I could come and go as I wanted. Oftentimes I'd come back to Da Nang, which was 15 miles or 15 kilometers away, about 10 miles or 9 miles, and get my laundry done on the weekend or go to the officers club and get a steak. I was really protein starved in the field. And I could go to Da Nang City, which most Marines couldn't, most Army couldn't. I could go places that other people couldn't. I had one time at Gonoy, I had an old nun that came out to see me, old nun. She was in her 70s. Of course, I'm getting close to that now, and I don't consider it so old. But then, she looked ancient. But she asked me for concrete, and I told her, well, I just can't provide you any concrete. We were not supposed to provide the Vietnamese any concrete because they'd use it to reinforce tunnels and bunkers. But anyway, I went to the orphanage that she ran. 4 nuns had about 2,000 kids, some older who helped and some younger, and lots of kids in diapers. My first wife and I corresponded about it, and we decided we would adopt the first baby in the first crib in the first building, and which we did. And so I adopted my daughter Leanne and brought her home babe in arms when my tour ended. It actually kept me there an extra month getting an exit visa and a Vietnamese adoption done. I had to do that. But if I hadn't had the freedom that I had, if I hadn't had the sort of ability to move about, I did provide her with some concrete. I can say that now. I wouldn't tell anybody then that I gave that none any concrete, but I also saw the building that got constructed out of it. Every bag of it got used there. But my war, everybody's war was different there. Everybody's war, and my war was different than most in that I had a lot of freedom. I did think I was doing the right thing. I could really, in many ways, I could prescribe my own job. I volunteered to go live with the Marines out at Gonoy. Nobody was going to make me. And as a matter of fact, I had a Vietnamese interpreter. I had a short language school, but it didn't take. And I know more Vietnamese now than I knew then. But my interpreter went with me and then deserted. He left. we got shot at one night, just very little, and he disappeared, and I don't know whatever happened to him.
Did that happen often? I mean, you were working with local military or paramilitary South Vietnamese. How reliable were they? And did you feel that it was just you and 7 Marines?
In our case, it was me and 7 Marines. We had what were called PSDFs, People's Self-Defense Forces, and they were 15 and 16-year-old kids that we armed with Korean vintage weapons, Thompson submachine guns and carbines and whatever we could get. And we'd go out and ambush and patrol at night, but if we got shot at night, they'd disappear. And we lost a lot of weapons because they'd throw their weapons in the river and then jump in after them. And I would have people called PSYOPs, psychological operations. They would come out and show movies in the village at night. I took a picture one night, saw Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid as a first-run movie in that village one night. And I took a picture of the crowd that was standing around and then got it developed later in Hong Kong and looked at it and I thought, well, I won't tell you what I thought, but there are 2 of the girls that were supposed to be out on the village perimeter standing there with their weapons watching the movie. and that's, some Vietnamese forces were very reliable, some were very unreliable, and I think it just varied. There was no telling what the composition was. I will say this about that. Quang Nam province, where we were, has the highest number of heroic mothers in the communist state at this point in time. Mothers who lost 3 or more sons to the revolution. So this includes Hanoi, all of North Vietnam, all of South Vietnam, all of Vietnam. The biggest number of heroic mothers live in Quang Nam province, which was friendly territory.
And like you said, that village was carpet bombed and leveled. Were the people who lived there previously brought back to that village? And are those the mothers, and are those the circumstances in which they lost their children?
No. The heroic mothers are mothers whose sons enlisted in the VC or the Northern Forces. They're sons who fought for the North and were killed. So there were a lot of kids killed in different situations in South Vietnam. There were kids that were killed in bombing. There were villages, whole villages that were wiped out. They're still gone. People are just called missing. We have 2,300 soldiers missing in the war. The Vietnamese have over 1 million people missing from the war, totally missing. But in the case of Gonoi was cleared. In 1968, Gonoi had a lot of Viet Cong who were mounting attacks against the airfield at Da Nang, against the province capital at Hoi An, which is about 10 kilometers away. So the U.S. military, the Marines, the Korean Marines, the Army all decided to absolutely clear it and bomb it. So they bombed it for 6 months. And it's in the final approach for the Da Nang Air Base. So bombers who didn't let their bombs go over Hanoi or didn't let their bombs go over Laos or wherever would drop their bombs on Gonoi as they were making a final approach to the Da Nang runway. It was as clean as this floor. It was jungle and rice fields. When I moved there was nothing but sand and metal debris and unexploded ordnance. That's all there was.
And you had to build a village out of that.
It was, there were the Marines, myself, other people like the State Department guy, Joe, that got killed. we were charged with building a village, a return to village project. And it was a model project. It was the way everything was supposed to go. Then President Thieu visited the village. They cleaned everything up like you wouldn't believe for that. Commanding General would drop out once a week. You'd see his helicopter coming, and we'd run, go get our helmets and flak jackets on so that we looked somewhat military presentable. And we knew his helicopter. We knew his helicopter at a distance. But he would come out and visit us, and he'd just walk through and see, say, how's it going, and da-da-da-da, and did you get this, and are you getting food? The Marines guaranteed you, at that point in time, the Marines guaranteed you one hot meal a day in the field. So they might drop it out of a helicopter at 10,000 feet, but they gave you a meal a day. So we had some very scrambled eggs a few times. And we also had hot food. The Korean Marines were in the other end of the island for some of that time, so we would trade them scrambled eggs for kimchi and then mix our remaining scrambled eggs with some kimchi. I learned to like kimchi that way.
I was going to say, was that any good?
Kimchi and scrambled eggs go together very well. There's a saying that I can't remember, but you just learn things under those sort of conditions. You learn what works and what doesn't. We got a lot of sea rations, which we traded to the villagers for some local food. We ate a lot of rice. We had local Cokes. We had beer Bumway Ba, which is beer 33, was always hot. We'd get the ice, which you weren't supposed to eat the ice there either because it was contaminated. Don't touch the water, don't drink the ice, or don't eat the ice. But we'd get ice for our beer, and we'd twizzle the ice around in our beer and then throw the ice out just to cool the beer off. But we had a woman, Ms. Tien, who often cooked for us. She about killed me with some uncooked snails one time. I had amoebic dysentery, and I was on the hospital ship Sanctuary for a couple of days with that. But Ms. Tien would cook for us. She always had Cokes and beer and whatnot. We figured out later her husband was a Viet Cong that we never saw. They were actually looking for him, and he never appeared again. I saw Ms. Tien again in 2004, and she told me that her husband never showed up again after the war. They don't know what happened to him or where his bones are.
One of the million missing.
Yeah. Her husband would be one of the million missing.
Aside from the amoebic dysentery, which was probably unpleasant militarily, what was your scariest moment?
It's hard to figure what your scariest moment is. I've only been shot at a few times, not very many really. Actually, my scariest moment, I was with a Vietnamese unit, and this Army team had what they called RFs, Regional Forces, which are a paramilitary unit also, but a little more professional. I went out on ambush with them one night, and they were out there smoking dope. So you could see them with a spliff a mile away, and I'm thinking, these guys are going to get a shot. And then somebody did shoot around. I don't know if it was us or somebody else, but these guys called in artillery, and the artillery came in right on top of us. So we had several people wounded. And I'm like, how are they going to get this stopped? I can't, I had access to a radio, but I couldn't speak enough Vietnamese to call the Vietnamese artillery back in Hoi An that was dropping 105s on us. I couldn't do anything. And I'm just, trying to dig a deeper hole. And that was pretty scary. Those guys going out, I didn't offer to go with them again. I really didn't. I thought they were they were hazards.
Well, that was enough.
That was enough. That was plenty enough.
And that was like a local patrol near your village?
Yeah, that was on Gonoi. That was a local patrol just west. The west, 1 kilometer west of the village, the island that I lived on was 11, I always get miles and kilometers mixed up, but I think it was 11 miles. No, 11 kilometers long, we'll go with that. And 1 kilometer west of the village, you were in no man's land. It was a free fire zone. So anybody could shoot anybody out there, no questions asked. And we had airstrikes that came in there. We had artillery we called in there. We had a lot that went on, and there was a sapper battalion, a North Vietnamese sapper battalion that we knew were at the far end of the island. It was the 82nd Sapper Battalion from Hanoi. They were very green, and they always had a lot of they had a lot of mess ups in what they did, which was fortunate for us. But we went out on ambush out in that no man's zone. The Marines went out there almost every night. The Army unit that was there, some of their people went out there every night. And it was real difficult to keep coordinated because we also had some Korean Marines that were coming and going. So there was Army, Marine Corps, Korean Marines, Vietnamese. You know, there were a lot of people out there.
Do you have instances of friendly fire between units?
Well, that was friendly fire, friendly artillery fire that we dropped on ourselves that one night. There was not too much, considering considering the people that were wandering around out there. I think the Koreans shot at us one night, but I'm not sure.
When you would go to Da Nang, you mentioned you'd go to Da Nang to the air base. Were you ever caught there when it was subjected to attack?
I was at the air base. The air base never got attacked directly when I was there. It was attacked in 1968, during Tet of 1968. But what would happen at the air base was that they would get rocketed at night. And oftentimes those rockets originated at Gonoi or near Gonoi. So I'd drive to Da Nang just to get rockets from home, as I used to say. But I told one time we were there at night, I tried not to stay at the air base at night. There was a 1st Marine Division rear, and I had a bunk there, and that was near the air base. But the air base was sort of obviously low and long because it had a 2-mile long runway. And they would take rockets at night. One night I was there when they did, and I told the guys, and it was at the far end, it wasn't anywhere near us, but I told the guys, they're missing me, they're sending me rockets from home.
You felt more secure in your village than you did at Da Nang?
Yes. Well, 1st Marine Division rear was really pretty secure. And I spent several weekends there, quite a few weekends, and Christmas and that sort of stuff. And it was really, it was up against the side of a mountain. They had good security on top of the mountain, good security around the bottom. They were much better secured than most of the other installations like the air base or the Army bases along China Beach. So that was really secure. You could sleep good. Very rarely did anything happen.
I'm wondering if you look back on it now, if ignorance was bliss. You talk about going back in 2004 and finding out about the tunnels. Would your attitudes or actions have changed if you'd known about the tunnels? What would have changed?
As I look back on it now, and hindsight's everything. Hindsight's 20/20. But ignorance really is bliss. If I'd have known what was going on in that village underneath my feet or around me or out in no man's land, I'd have, they would have been a whole different war. I didn't have to stay out there. I might not have. The fact that it was as insecure as it was, I didn't really realize that. You think you got a defensive perimeter and you've got some machine guns set up in the perimeter, but people are coming in and out your back door, so to speak. It was the village was right next to a river. So we had a defensive perimeter around 3 sides, but not the riverside. People were coming and going at night in canoes, boats on the river we didn't even know about. People were tunneled underneath us. The land is very sandy, and I dug some wells, never found a bottom to the sand, found a lot of water. But apparently there were concrete reinforced tunnels under the village when we were there. The party chairman there at the village now was the VC commander at the village at the time I was there. And I asked him, I didn't know that, but I asked him, how long have you lived at Gonoy? And he said, all my life, I've never left. And I said, but there were no middle-aged men in the village when I was there. And he said, I was there. He said, I know you, you just don't know me.
How did you deal with that? Obviously, everything is safe there now, but what went on in your mind as you heard that?
It's probably, you probably don't want to hear it here.
It's a free and open mic.
It was just like, oh shit. You know, what was I thinking? What was going on? What was going on in my head? Why wasn't I looking at things more closely? Basically, why didn't I understand? Why didn't I understand what was really going on in the war? And why didn't I understand an insurgency? America wasn't the first, but we used an insurgency effectively against the British in the 1700s, very effectively. And other people have adopted our ideas and perfected them since. An insurgency is just almost impossible to defeat, virtually impossible. And whether it's search and destroy, or it's pacification, or it's winning hearts and minds, or whatever it is, if you can't identify the enemy, you can't win. Vietnamese fought the Chinese for 1,000 years like that. They defeated the Chinese, it just took them 1,000 years. If we had known that history and understood that history and understood what an insurgency really looked like on a large scale, I'm not sure we would have been there. I don't think it would have. I think we would have understood that it was not winnable. You know, I have friends that say, well, we should have nuked them all. Kill them all, let God sort them out. And it just, you know, there's just no good answer to what you do in a war like that. There's no good answer. I mean, we're seeing no good answer at this point in time. Same sort of stuff. We're seeing, you know, more and more bombings in Baghdad. We're seeing more and more problems in Afghanistan. We're you know, Syria's a total mess, but insurgencies are just impossible to defeat.
Well, it's not really so much a question, I guess. American military hubris, Cold War politics, and not even understanding the history of Vietnam and the French colonial efforts in that area, all kind of combined to blind us, or?
We were blind to what we were doing, and we did it a step at a time. I mean, we had President Truman, President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, and President Johnson, and then Nixon and Ford, all involved in this, and none of their policies, none of it really made good sense in hindsight, but at the time, everybody thought they were doing the right thing. The only one I could really fault would be Truman, because we had people who fought with Ho Chi Minh to get rid of the Japanese. And then Ho Chi Minh wrote Truman several letters and asked to be an American territory or anything, just don't let the French come back in. French, in the form of President de Gaulle, said, Vietnamese people are our property, we want our property back. So we sent a whole different set of advisors to help the French take back control. In 1954, when the French were finally soundly defeated, they left, and we took over. We divided the country. America in the Geneva Accords divided the country. We appointed a Boston expat by the name of Diem as president of South Vietnam, and then promised elections in 55 or 6, but we canceled them and kept Diem, who was, been living in America, kept him on as president. So,
abrogating the terms of the Geneva Accords, if anyone cares to read them or look at them, we were not supposed to install anyone. We were not supposed to officially recognize any government in South Vietnam. But based on the advice of CIA operative Edward Lansdale, Eisenhower said, okay, let's do that.
well,
So it's one mistake after another, and it's Cold War policies that misinterpret the local landscape as far as the Vietnamese people, like you had said, fought the Chinese for 1,000 years. How are we going to overcome that?
Vietnam is a series of mistakes, and I don't think anybody was more anti-war than Eisenhower. If you read the statements he made about war and about the military-industrial complex, you know that by the time he was president, he was really anti-war. But it was almost like the office was bigger than the person. He just kept committing more and more and more people to a situation that, we were signers of the Geneva Accords. We basically broke our agreements from the Geneva Accords. We tried to keep power. By then it was about communism. When it first started with Truman, it was simply about colonialism. We had to establish Western dominance once again in this area of the world. And communism was not a problem in 1946 and 47, not too much. Stalin was a little bit of a problem, but it wasn't really, Mao hadn't really risen to power, and it wasn't really a big problem. It was about colonialism. So each series of mistakes compounded the next. So we made a lot of mistakes, and presidents of, Democratic, Republican, Democrat, Democrat, Republican, Republican, they all made mistakes through time, and oftentimes on good advice. But, the basic concept was flawed to begin with. You're going to make, every mistake is every mistake compounds it.
And those mistakes put young men like you in Southeast Asia, and you stayed true to the mission. You had faith in the mission. As you were getting short and you were getting near the end of your tour, you had a future plan. You and your wife had agreed to adopt. What were you thinking as you were nearing the end of your tour, and did your attitudes and behaviors change?
I don't think so. I don't think that my attitudes and behaviors really changed toward the end of my tour. But part of that was because I was in some ways such a free agent. Literally, I had my own transportation. I could come and go where I wanted. So I could, in some ways, just do what I wanted. I could spend time at Gonoy. I could go to this refugee village or that refugee village. I was still pretty much a gung-ho lieutenant. And as a matter of fact, one of the guys that was one of our enlisted people from that unit that was with him in the Marines with me has been back to Vietnam with me twice. And he tells me, he says, "You were so gung-ho. I can't believe you were so gung-ho." He was drafted out of graduate school at Berkeley and was a translator of sorts. And he got a hold of me in 2010, and we went back to Vietnam, and then he went back in 2013 with a student group. But he told, I was listening to him talk to the students. He said, "Oh, Lieutenant Waite was so gung-ho, he was unbearable." And
was that a surprise to you?
that was kind of a surprise. I felt like I did my job. I had a more basic sense of patriotism than I do now, I think the sense of patriotism that I had then was you just do as you're told. Now my sense of patriotism is investigate, what's behind it, and let's see what we can do about it to make things right. So, I have a shirt that I didn't wear it in here today, but peace is patriotic. And working for peace is very patriotic, I think. But at the time, it didn't matter whether it was war, peace, or whatever, you did what your country wanted, and that was being patriotic.
You exited Vietnam. How long did you stay in the service after that?
I went in the service in 1967. I left the active service in the spring of 1972. I stayed in the reserves as a basic training company commander until 1981. So I went back and forth from Indiana. I went back and forth to Fort Benning as a basic training company commander.
And you carried back with you not just your memories of Vietnam, but a living legacy. Your daughter came back with you. Did that influence your decision to go back to Vietnam, and when did you go back the first time?
When I left the military in the 80s, I had no thoughts about going back to Vietnam. If you ask my daughter what she is, she'll tell you she's an Asian Hoosier. She was raised here in Muncie. She went to Burris. She went to St. Mary's and then to Burris. And she had no desire to go back. In the late 90s, I'd been divorced, I was remarried, and my daughter and I started talking, why don't we go to Vietnam? And Lynn says, yes, I'd really like to see Vietnam. So in 2000, the three of us went back together. We went to a lot of the places where we'd been during the war, or we went to the orphanage where Lynn came from. The orphanage now is a home for old folks. The government manages adoptable kids because there's money in that. So the nuns who were there at the time running the orphanages, one of them, who was a very young nun at the time, is still there. And my daughter and her took off and went around Da Nang to different places. My daughter speaks no Vietnamese, but they both spoke enough French to get by. And, but anyway, when we were there in 2000, we went to Gonoy, and I met people who said they knew me. I didn't remember them. But I started formulating plans for actually doing some research on how this village had developed and changed and how it had grown back into the landscape the way it had once been. So I applied for and got the Cohen Research Fellowship for the Cohen Peace Studies Fellowship for 2004, and I went back and lived at Gonoy for the summer and did some research, and then started going back with students, other groups, different people. So I've been back 11 times since then, 11 times since 2000, counting 2000.
Was it hard in that first time to revisit scenes of emotion, very intense memories? Was that hard for you?
When I went back the first time, I woke up looking for my weapon. It was the smell, the heat. The hotel air conditioners didn't make a bit of difference. It still smelled like some place that I'd been before. The noise, I was really suspicious of how people would treat me. Actually, Vietnamese love Americans. They dislike what America did, but they love Americans. This is kind of emotional still, but during that first visit, I was at Nha Trang, which is between Ho Chi Minh City, between Saigon and Da Nang. And it's a beautiful, beautiful beach, probably the world's most beautiful beach. So my daughter and my wife, they wanted to stop there, so we did. We also had people to visit there. A restaurant owner friend of mine in Indianapolis His parents lived there, and we visited his parents. But I walked down to the beach, and I was talking to a bookseller who's sort of famous. He trades books with people. You take a book down, and he'll trade you any book that he's got. He's just on the beach. He's got books all over the place and little shelters on the beach. But I was talking to him about where I was during the war. So as I was walking back to the hotel from the beach by myself about dusk, two guys on a moped come up really quickly. And I'm like, what's going to happen here? What's going on? And one guy, the guy on the back, jumps off and runs up to me and says, "You go noi, me VC go noi, shoot your ass." and it gave me a big hug. But, I've had a lot of stuff like that happen since I've been going back. In some ways, we're all soldiers, no matter which side we fought on. At this point in time, the war's gone, the war's fini, over, het roy, as the Vietnamese say, and so we were all soldiers. We may have been shooting at each other then, but we were doing the same job, and we understand them, they understand us. There's a woman that's a really famous war hero in the South near Saigon, and she owns a restaurant. I take students to her restaurant every now and again. And the last time I was there, she pinned one of her medals on me. She said, "She's a good soldier. I was too."
And people who were on such opposite sides can come together after 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah. I had another thing like that happen to me. I had another instance that happened many, many years after the fact in Germany. My wife is German. Her uncle was in Rommel's army, and then on the Eastern Front was taken prisoner and kept prisoner in Siberia for a year or two. But as he was dying, he asked my wife and I to come and sort of explain through her. He said, "I was a soldier, your husband's a soldier. I can talk to him about some of this stuff that I never talked to anybody about, and because he's a soldier, he'll understand." And he gave us 2 hours on tape right before he died about his experiences in Africa and Russia that none of his family ever heard.
Wow. And he shared them with you.
Yeah.
And there's a common experiences, common bond among all soldiers, you think?
I think it's just, I really think that's a common bond among all soldiers. I have people that I know that don't agree with my take on the war, nor do I agree with theirs. Like I said, some people said we should have nuked them all, killed them all. And they certainly don't agree with mine. I work in peace studies at this point in time. But we're still close because we were brothers in arms.
You've taken students over. You've taken students in your classes over to visit Vietnam, and you've taken veterans over as well. What are the differences in reactions when they get there, and how do they cross generations to communicate those emotions?
Working with veterans and students in Vietnam, putting those two groups together, is really a lot of fun because the veterans oftentimes will open up about their experiences. The students are really interested, and although they're naive, and obviously the place is not the same at this point in time, it brings about some different sorts of reactions. I've got a new book that will be out on Amazon here yet this summer about that, and it's about students. And the title is The Millennial Generation in Vietnam, Lock and Load, Rock and Roll. When we stepped out, when I took a group of 10 students and 5 veterans to Vietnam in 13, and when we stepped out of the airport, one of the veterans said to the other, "Welcome home, brother. Lock and load, rock and roll." and the students picked that up and started using it much differently, but that was their mantra for the whole trip.
Yeah.
And the veterans, some were reserved, some were really out there, but the students spent time on the bus with them, on boats and hotels and restaurants. We all ate together, we talked together, we went to different places, we went to different cultural sites as well as different war sites. We went to places where these guys were in different battles. We had 2 Marines, 3 Army. And these students are the age that we were when we were there. So in some ways we can relate to them. In some ways, there's some boundaries there, but still we can relate to them because they're as young and dumb as we were when we were there.
But it's entirely different. Is Vietnam now more westernized in urban centers, and where our students can understand that environment? And how do they react to the Vietnamese?
Vietnam is westernized to some degree, and it's westernizing very quickly. In 2010, there were something like, in 2010 there were less than 10,000 cars on the streets of Saigon. Millions and millions and millions of mopeds. When you drive up to a traffic light, you'll see mopeds 30 and 40 across, and pedal to pedal, foot to foot, pedal to pedal, and lined up as far as the eye can see. There's no way to explain how many mopeds you can get in one intersection. They've got traffic lights since 2004, which they never had in Saigon before. It was a mix and mash sort of, so just actually organized chaos. And since 2004, they've got traffic lights. They've got a helmet law that came about in 2008. And now that since 2010, they've got new car dealerships, and there's probably 100,000 cars in that 8 or 9 million mopeds that are on the street at any time. There are buses, there are trucks, there are water buffalo carts, there are hand carts, there are bicycles, it's anything but Western. It is so foreign to our students. They just go into shock. You have to just get them out there. You have to push them out into traffic and say, hey, we're going to walk. For instance, when you walk across the street in Ho Chi Minh City, that's an experience. I took my department chair with me from Ball State one time, and she'd freeze like a deer in the headlights. She'd get halfway across the street and freeze up. And I just, what you have to do is you have to keep your eye on where you're going and walk at the same pace, and do not look at anybody, do not make eye contact, and the mopeds and traffic will just flow around you smooth as could be. But I had one student that was hit by a moped, and some old lady, 75 or 80-year-old lady on a moped hit this student. It knocked the moped down, knocked the student down, just bruised the student, luckily. But the old lady got up, cussing her out in Vietnamese, and put her moped up and left. And it was not humorous to me at the time because I was responsible for the student, but it was just, thinking about it later, it was just funny. But students soon learn to deal with the traffic. Students soon learn that this is different than anything they've ever seen before. Now, you can say it's westernizing because you've got more cars, but you've still got the main mode of transportation is mopeds. In Ho Chi Minh City, they sell 1,500 new mopeds a day. in order to buy a new moped, you have to get a driver's license. Most people in Vietnam have not got driver's licenses. So in order to buy a new moped, the government requires a new driver's license. There are new laws, like helmet laws. I have to have a helmet. My head's 7 3/4, so I take my equestrian helmet with me, and that passes for a moped helmet. But so I can drive a moped or be on a moped. But they have elongated seats that they put on mopeds, so you can take the whole family out for a drive. So you'll see, you used to see, 3, 4, 5 people on a moped really packed on there. Now there are laws about that, so you can only have 2 people on a moped or 2 people and a baby. The government does not require helmets on babies, which was really amazing to me. And then I got told the reason. They said, well, that helmet on top of its head can restrict its growth. So they're really concerned about people being tall enough to be Western. But there's the culture itself, the city itself, the cities, the towns, they're not Westernizing in ways that you and I would think. Vietnamese take other cultures and make it their own. They make it uniquely their own. So when we go to Hoi An, which is a place I've lived before and I dearly love, you can find American and English and Spanish and Portuguese and French and Chinese and Thai cuisines all rolled into one. It's the cuisine capital of Southeast Asia. That the Vietnamese have ways of putting stuff together and making it individual and their own, like no other people I've seen. It's really amazing.
Did you find you missed that when you went back? Was the cuisine, was the food even better? Did the smells change? Did things change over time, the more visits you took, and it became less threatening?
The smell of the heat and the fish oil smell never change. Never, ever, ever. When you step out of the portal, I call it a portal, it's a door, but when you step out of the air conditioning of the Ho Chi Minh Airport and step into that city street with all that noise and all that smell and all that heat, you're like, I know where I am. I know where this is. Cuisine changes, but a lot of it has been there for hundreds of years. So there's a lot that's constant. Other stuff changes. This shirt's made in Hoi An. I've had lots of clothing made there. It's really, you can get, I told somebody before the taping that this shirt is at least 12 years old, but you can get really nice clothing made for fairly inexpensively, half of what it would cost you otherwise. So thread shops and cuisine and whatever, there's just a lot once again that's uniquely Vietnamese.
When you take veterans back, your experiences have been by and large positive. Do you feel a sense of closure, and what do you hope to achieve when you take veterans back over to revisit the sights and sounds, and in some cases the adversaries?
My purpose in what I do is basically try and educate people about the real Vietnam. When we were there in 1960s and 70s, we didn't know the real Vietnam, and very, very, very few people knew the Vietnamese on any sort of intimate basis. Had we knew Vietnam, had we studied Vietnam, had we done the sorts of stuff that I'm doing right now, I don't think there ever would have been an American war in Vietnam. But, like I say, hindsight's 20/20. What we've got to do is we've got to get our kids to understand that this is a global world and that they've got to know people from other places. They've got to know people on a people-to-people basis. They've got to understand how the world has worked in the past and what mistakes have been made before so that we don't repeat them. They've got to understand. They've got to understand what sorts of conflict situations cause wars, and taking veterans with them is a really good way to educate them about that. Now, my goal in all of this is to get people to come back and talk about Vietnam and talk about this as another culture, another place, as a different people, to talk about people. So my students go and they come back and they write papers, some of which get published. We've written 2 books. Second one's in the process of getting published right now. We've done a sort of film series that went to 7th grade students here in the state. We have done a lot of work to try and educate people. The students have talked to church groups, civic groups, class groups, academic conferences. They've taken their experiences and taken them other places. And that's the idea of doing it. It's just one person at a time. Mother Teresa said she never intended to start an order. She simply intended to pick up one person off the streets. And she's in the book, Such a Vision of the Street, she talks about just you can work with one person, you can change one person, but if that one person changes one person more and more and more, then you've made some positive change in the world. And that's what I hope to do.
So you were a Cold Warrior, and now you're a warrior for peace, or a proponent of peace. A warrior for peace, that's an oxymoron.
Warrior for peace is an oxymoron, but in some ways you're working for peace the same way we work to win a war. You know, you've just got, and I like it and I don't like it. The warrior for peace term. It is sort of an oxymoron. And I tell my students I try to be a peace worker. That's really all I can do, is I can work at it.
What have I forgotten to ask you, Jerry?
I don't know.
I've hardly looked at my notes because we had a good conversation, but when future generations, look back at this tape and other records of all the interviews that we hope to do with Vietnam veterans 30, 40, 50 years down the road, what do you want future generations to know about you, your generation, and the war in Vietnam?
As I look at my life and think about future generations in this country, future generations in Vietnam and other places, I would like it if I could make some small change in how I get people to look at war and look at conflict. I'm maybe not a good example. I think people could start at age 1 being peacemakers. You don't have to take such radical changes, and radical changes in your life at age 40 or whatever aren't always that pleasant. But I would hope that by looking at where we were in Vietnam and looking at the sorts of things that war does to people, that we could put an end to conflict, put an end to violent conflict particularly. Nonviolence, live in a more nonviolent world, more of a progressive, workable world that adapts to people instead of trying to force, instead of trying to force your ideas on people, win them over through love and kindness.
That sounds like a great plan, actually.
Well,
it does.
This isn't for the tape necessarily, but I've spent 18 years here at Ball State teaching in the prison program too. And I still get letters reminding me that, my teaching, my being there had influence on people, positive influence, which I didn't expect at the time. It was just a job. But I'm retired from that, and the Peace Studies thing is what I do in my retirement. And it's and you know, all I'm trying to do is trying to understand myself and how I work and how I best work in all this, and to also make some change in the people around me. But I can't change them unless I can change me, unless I can be a more peaceable person. I can't change people around me at all.
Yeah. Starts with you, radiates from there, and like
Yeah.
you say, it's a series of connections that
It is.
you, through
Life
Facebook or
is-
social media.
Life is a series of social connections. That's all, you know. Whether it's family, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's you know, whatever it is, we are social beings, and we connect and reconnect and reconnect. I'm always amazed at how many connections Facebook has. I get emails from people that I'm not connected with on Facebook, but they heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from my nephew. I lost a phone in the Charlotte airport, and some woman from Virginia emailed me and said she had my phone, and that somebody had picked it up in the Charlotte airport and dropped it off at her office, and she had my phone, and she found me because somehow or the other she connected with my nephew on Facebook, and then got my email address and connected with me, sent me my phone back.
So
I sent her a bouquet of flowers, but
it's nice.
yeah.
But it's a small world, and it's little gestures and
Well-
acts of kindness, one little one at a time. You start with that, and you build.
Yeah, there's this thing called random acts of kindness. I think that's important. We need to think about that.
Any final thoughts? And Richard's going to talk in our ears and ask us other questions probably, but I want to give you the floor, Jerry, to summarize.
No, I think we summarized here the last few statements. So unless see what Richard's got
Okay,
to
we'll
say.
see what Richard says. And he may come back. Oh, you need to talk about. He may not. We'll see.
Did we get his first impression when he landed in Vietnam?
Talk about going back, but maybe not your first impression in 1970. So we might talk about that. And it's probably going to be the same as when you landed again. Yeah.
it was when I landed. When I landed in Vietnam, I flew Flying Tiger, which was a military contractor airline, and we flew through. I reported to Fort Lewis, Washington. I flew through Alaska and Tokyo. I remember seeing Mount Fuji on the way, and it was the old Tokyo airport then. Narita wasn't built. And then flew into Cam Bay at night. And I remember I do remember the heat getting off the airplane. I don't necessarily remember the smell, but then they put us on a bus and took us to a plywood barracks that was dark, and the lighting wasn't very good, and it was moldy. It smelled moldy. And there were bunks with sheets on them. We just put our stuff down, and it was probably 10 or 11 o'clock at night there. We'd flown for 20 hours to get there. And so we slept until the next day. The next day we got up, and I remember seeing Cam Bay out. The barracks was up on a hillside, and I didn't know what to think. One of the guys said, well, what if we get rocketed here or whatever? Because Cam Bay had been rocketed the day before. But I remember seeing Cam Bay, and it was really pretty. I remember I remember the foliage. The foliage was really dense and thick. And I do remember the smell that day. I didn't remember it from the night before, but that fish oil smell along the coast, it's always there. And so I was there for one day, and then they picked me up in a C-130, 4-engine propeller aircraft, and flew me a military plane, just one with the net seats along the sides, flew me to Da Nang, and then at Da Nang, somebody picked me up with a Jeep, took me to what they called I Corps headquarters, which was an old French fort in downtown Da Nang, and they assigned me the 1st Marine Division, so I went from there to the Marines. But that were my first impressions of Vietnam. I do remember that I landed with there were 10 people that on that busload that came with that plane that were helicopter pilots. And I do remember thinking at the time, these were warrant officer helicopter pilots from Fort Walters, Texas, and they'd just been through helicopter school and hadn't even had any stateside assignment. And I remember thinking, how many of these guys are going to be out of here alive inside of a month or two?
It's not couldn't have been a pleasant job, but I've heard nothing but respect for some. We had Gary Bussell in yesterday the other day talking about those helicopter pilots. They have my respect. They went through a lot of hell.
Well, the one group that I had a brother-in-law that was a helicopter pilot. He got shot down 4 times, walked away each time. And he actually, one of the villages I built at Gonoy, the second village, he actually burned it. He took fire from there, and his squadron literally burned that village. It was wood. It was made of wood, but all the houses were wood, and they just torched it. But the Army helicopter pilots were fearless. They were like the rest of us. They were young and dumb. If we got somebody wounded, and we had people wounded at Gonoy, if we called a Marine Corps medevac, some guy would hang around at 10,000 feet and say, "Are you taking fire? Is this a hot landing zone? Is this a hot LZ?" And a half hour later, he might come down for a second while you throw a person on that's probably, half bled to death by then. Whereas with the Army we could call, and we could call sometimes Army medevac. And Army dust off, you would hear the helicopter before you saw it. They'd come to, there was a bridge called the Callow Bridge that was about a half mile away, and you'd hear the helicopter, and you'd see the helicopter come under the bridge and down along the riverbank. The riverbank was probably 20 feet down to the river. They'd fly right down the riverbank, they'd pop up over the riverbank, and before you could even pop smoke for them, they'd have landed, took a person, and they were gone. With some of the pilots, when you have a 35 or 40-year-old pilot that's got 3 or 4 kids at home, he's a lot more cautious than a 22-year-old cowboy. And the helicopter pilots, the Army helicopter pilots, were cowboys. I actually had 2 brother-in-laws that were cowboy pilots. One did 2 tours, one did 1. My sister is since divorced from the one I was talking about. He's still flying. He's flying tourists in Hawaii at this point in time.
Still flying.
Still flying.
Jeez. Well, there's someone in Ridgeville we're supposed to talk to who flew for the Army for 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Did we hit it, Richard? He'll tell us. He's the boss. I'm just the monkey asking questions.
Talk a little bit more about doing patrols at night.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because you did, when you were in the village, you said you'd go out with some of the local forces, but also with your Marines as well. Describe like a Marine patrol, going out with the Marines.
Okay. We'd have a siesta somewhere, like a bunker, which was sometimes cool and didn't have flies. We'd have a siesta in the afternoon on Gonoy, and then we would sit down probably at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a map and plan out where we were going to go that night. We may have an ambush, we may have a trail where we think people are coming in or where we think people are crossing the river. We may have some area that we've seen signs that people have been traveling that are not associated with the village. So we would go out and patrol those areas at night or set up an ambush at night. Or we would set up a series of ambushes around the village at night, most of the time unsuccessfully. But we would generally pre-planned fires. Means we would get in contact with a mortar unit or an artillery unit and plan out fires with coordinates, where we're going to be, where we would like to have pre-planned fires. So if we are out there and we get in some sort of trouble, then we can call in a pre-planned fire. Most of the time, the Marine Sergeant was in charge of all this. He'd take my advice, but he said, lieutenants can't really read maps. And actually, I taught map reading at Fort Benning for a little bit, so I was kind of insulted by that. But he was pretty good. The time with the ARVN unit, or the RF unit, was an absolute disaster. They should have let somebody, like some lieutenant, look at their map at that point. But but most of the time, and I didn't do it a tremendous amount. I sure didn't stay in the village by myself at night. If there was no place else to go, if they were going out, I went out with them. I was safer there than I was in the village. We had one Marine that was killed because he decided he wanted to sleep in one night. So he stayed in the bunker, and some kid threw a hand grenade in the bunker with him. But sometimes I slept with the little Army unit. One time I slept with the Korean unit. I was kind of a gypsy. I didn't have a real home. The Caps were the closest thing I had to a home, and I was assigned to the Marine Corps. So I stayed there most of the time, or stayed with them.
But as a freelance artist, like you said, you had a lot of freedom, a lot more than
Oh,
any
I
other
could take.
lieutenant.
I could go ride a civilian bus back to Da Nang, or if there were somebody out there that day, I might get a ride back to Da Nang, or might get a ride to Hoi An. So I would sleep wherever I landed, but I had serious considerations. I had serious security considerations if I was staying in the village at night. I wanted to stay close to the Marines.
Now we'll see. See, sometimes I miss things.
In that respect, did you have to be Larry of the villagers?
What do you mean, leery of the villagers?
You talked about the one Marine who slept in and got the grenade thrown in. Now, how would that have person gotten through the perimeter?
That was a kid in the village that did that.
As a village kid. So there were times when you really didn't know who the enemy was.
No, there were a lot of times when I didn't know who the enemy was. And it was really, it was a weird situation, where you don't trust anybody, even the kids. I trusted my bomb finders not to get me blown up. That was, but I didn't totally trust them. And actually, one of them is the son of the party chairman, so he was the son of the VC commander. He just happened to be 8 years old at the time. I know him now too. But I wasn't leery of the villagers. I just didn't take any chances. There's a picture of me sitting in Ms. Tien's house, and I'm sitting there having a Coke in the afternoon or something of the sort. And my rifle is leaning up against the wall behind her. And a lot of Marines tell me, they said, I can't believe you let that woman get between you and the weapon, you and your weapon. A Marine sleeps with his weapon. A Marine and his weapon are inseparable. Army doggies are a little more careless. And actually, I carried a .45. That was my only assigned weapon, but I got a M16 when I went to live at Gonoy. But there's a good picture of that M16, and with her in the picture and me, I'm sitting on the other side taking the picture. And the Marines, every time a Marine sees that, every Marine that's ever seen that picture says, "Can't believe you let her get between you and your weapon."
You talked about having the 45 on your hip. Now that was, officers generally use the sidearm. And did you have your rank displayed, or how did you secure yourself in that regard? Were you expected to be saluted? Did you have your rank on your shoulders?
No. Actually, most of the time at Gonoy, I wore a T-shirt. So we didn't have any rank showing. I had rank on my hat, but I took it off. You didn't want to have rank showing. We did have, we never got any sniper fire at Gonoy, but we could. So you didn't want to have your rank showing. People knew who I was, and I knew who they were. And we wore T-shirts, and I had a bush hat, a floppy bush hat that kept the rain out and whatever else. And I've got rank on it now. I've still got that hat, but I didn't have rank on it when I lived there. And I had a shirt with my rank on it, and if the general's helicopter showed up, we'd put our shirts on, put our flak jacket on, and so, you know, he could tell who we were. And actually, after we got to know him, his name was General Doler, I think, and after we got to know him a little bit, we didn't even do that. He'd just show up and we'd talk to him and he'd leave.
He understood, you think, the circumstances you were in with regards to a lot of military protocol and letting that?
He really did. He really did. As a matter of fact, I do remember one time when he showed up that we saluted him and he told us, "You don't have to salute me out here."
Yeah, probably better for him if you don't.
Yeah.
He got his own helicopter and someone just saluted him. A sniper might make the right conclusion.
Somebody could, and he was within sniper range. He crossed the river, there was a tree line, lots of good places, probably 300-400 yards away for snipers.
You talked about making sure you were careful in your situations and with your own personal security. Did you have stress and anxiety and feel danger the entire time you were in Vietnam?
Well, I don't think I did. I don't think I was stressed when I was there. I don't think I felt like I was really in any sort of danger. But that's part of being young and dumb. But I do know that after I came back, and for several years after, I was really clinically depressed. And I have a friend, Richard, who's he's a personal friend, but he's also a psychiatrist. And he said, "Well, you know, you've come from a very stressful situation. You don't realize it, but that's why you are where you are now." So, and I, for several, I think I felt the effects of the stress for several years after.
How did you deal with it?
Badly. I dealt with it rather badly. I don't think, you know, my family suffered, my friends suffered. I didn't get stuff done that I should. I didn't, you know, there were no real, I didn't have any alcohol problems, but I was pretty bipolar for some time. And Richard and then others that I've talked to since then said that's a form of PTSD. That's just reacting to the stressful situation you've come from to where you are now.
Several of the veterans I've spoken with in the past few weeks have mentioned that when they got back and tried to get back into civilian life, that they felt isolated because no one wanted to talk to them about their service and no one cared. The other extreme was people were angry at them. Did you experience that for yourself, and do you think it contributed to some of your problems?
When I came back from Vietnam, I didn't run into any of the airport stuff that people report on at this point in time. There were a group of Hare Krishnas that were being all nice in the San Francisco airport. My daughter and I had both gone through immigration in a hangar in Anchorage that was 18 below at the time, and we both were sick by the time we got to San Francisco, and then really sick by the time we got to St. Louis. But when I got back, the local paper did a story on Leanne, did a story on my bringing this baby back on the plane. My dad was a officer in the local American Legion. The local VFW offered me a honorary membership or a membership gratis. And there's just all sorts of stuff that, you know, this is small town America. People didn't understand where you've been, but they tried to make you welcome back. But I still felt isolated too. Felt like they didn't understand. They didn't know. They, and I felt like there's a war going on and people are dying and these people don't care. You know, they just want to wave the flag and have a parade.
Did that, I guess, manifest itself in any confrontational way with anyone?
No, more self-isolation.
At what point, you know, talking with your friend Richard and others who are out trying to help you, at what point did you decide, I think I need to talk to somebody or I need to see somebody?
Actually, I didn't really decide that until the 80s. Now, I went through most of the 70s. And in the 80s, I finally went to see somebody. You know, Richard really encouraged me to see somebody, but he was in New York, I was here in Indiana, so we didn't see much of each other. And obviously, he's my friend, so I'm not going to talk to him much on that line anyhow. But he really encouraged me. And during the 80s, I started going to counselors and started really looking at where I was with all this and sort of this paper world that I'd created.
Trying to find the proper follow-up. Do you think did you have a better experience talking to other veterans, like at the VFW and maybe even with your father? Your father was a veteran?
Yeah.
And were you able to get some understanding with other veterans? Did that help?
Talking to other veterans has helped. And actually, I'll tell you what, traveling to Vietnam with other veterans has really helped because you get to see the war very differently. People in a line unit, people in an infantry unit saw the war a lot differently than what I did. You know, I knew people like that there, and in some ways I was the same as they were, but in other ways I wasn't. You know, this free agent thing was in some ways bad. Well, it wasn't bad. It gave me a very unique war experience, but people who were in line units really had it tough in a lot of ways. And but taking some of those people back and starting to understand their stories and understanding how different each of our stories are has really made a difference in my life.
You've talked with Vietnamese who were veterans. Seeing the war from their side, what does that tell you? What does that inform you of?
They fought for their country. They didn't fight, they weren't communists, they weren't idealists, they weren't fighting for some, you know, abstract entity. We were foreign invaders. They fought foreigners who wanted to run their country. That's the way they see it, plain and simple. Most of the veterans, most of the Vietnamese veterans are not members of the Communist Party, weren't, never will be. You know, Ho Chi Minh is really, you know, that's their George Washington. He's the father of modern Vietnam. But most of them would not fight somewhere else for him. They were fighting to defend their homeland, and they were fighting an invader in their homeland. So, and I understand that. I'd still do the same thing here. But I don't think at this point in my life, even if I had the physical ability, that I would be the invader in somebody else's land. I actually learned a really good lesson when I was a kid that I should have took with me. Didn't understand it fully then, I do now. But I delivered papers, and there was this guy I knew by the name of Perry who I didn't get along with. And one day when I delivered a paper to his front door, he was standing around the side. He said, "Come around here." And we got into a fight in his backyard. And then his mother came out and beat the living daylights out of me with a broom. And I'm like, never, ever, ever get into a fight in somebody else's backyard. And we're still learning that lesson. We're in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan, we're in other places. We got over 700 military bases around the world where we're trying to control other people. And Vietnam was the same way. Why go to somebody else's backyard? You can't win. World War II was a different sort of war. And we had people who were taking the war out of their country and trying to conquer. And but wars since that time, Korea's a non-winner, Vietnam's a non-winner. The Panama only because we put, 6,000 people after about 1,500, and Grenada the same way. Desert Storm was incomplete. We're still fighting it now. And, it's just, you don't do well in other people's homes.
So watch for Mom and her broom.
Yeah, she beat the living daylights out of me. Man, I
Wow.
lost big time on that.
To get it from the kid and then to get it from the mom, that's rough. That's when you stop delivering papers to the house, I think, Jerry.
No, I delivered papers. I just collected from his dad.
Better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there any reaction from fellow soldiers or anyone adopting a Vietnamese child?
Yeah. Okay. Adopting a Vietnamese child was really problematic with some people because some people really hated the Vietnamese, really hated them. I had a friend, Roy, that when we came back to the United States, he just told me, "I'm not having anything to do with anybody that has anything to do with those gooks." That was the last time he ever spoke to me. And that's really, I lost a few friends like that. A lot of people who were there liked the Vietnamese, but some, especially people in hardcore combat units, really hated the Vietnamese. You had to hate them to try and kill them on a mass scale. And Roy was in the Americal division, which was south of us. The Americal division was the same division that created the My Lai massacre. So that was not their modus operandi most of the time, but it was some of the time. But he hated them. He really hated them, and he hated my daughter and really cut me off because of that adoption.
That's sad.
Happens.
I think we label people, or we demonize the enemy, dehumanize the enemy, just to make it easier.
There's a guy by the name of Philip Knightley that wrote a book called The First Casualty, and his thesis is that the first casualty in any war is the truth. No matter whether it's Crimea or it's World War I or World War II, you have to tell a lie to get people to start killing each other. And one of the lies that's told is demonizing people, telling people how different these people are.
Yeah. That's foreign to me. It's antithetical to the way I am now. You know, you talked about changing your way of life at 40, and I experienced the same thing. So it's, you know, I went from rah guns to that's stupid. And I guess people can change if there's something good to take from it. It's if we think about our actions and our history and see people as people and not as representatives of their political whatever, then we can relate to people better. Yeah. We do better.
Richard, got anything more?
That's it from Richard.
That's it from Richard.
Heather?
That included Heather's stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, Jerry, on behalf of Ball State and WIPB, I want to thank you. Thank you for coming in and
You're
talking
welcome.
with me.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.